Our book today is Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan J. Robinson. This is from the introduction. In the last few years, U.S. politics has become completely upended. The presidency of Donald Trump, which took politicians and commentators by total surprise, shattered a number of Washington orthodoxies. Very few experts thought that a vicious, loutish reality TV star was capable of rising to the nation's highest office. But they had misjudged political reality and forgot the cardinal rule: anything can happen. Trump's improbable rise to power was not the only political irregularity to occur over the last several years. While Trump was defeating the most powerful figures in the country's two major political parties, another unexpected phenomenon was occurring: the rise of a new radicalism on the left. When Bernie Sanders began his campaign for the 2016 presidential nomination, nobody expected him to pose a serious challenge to Hillary Clinton. Clinton was the consensus choice of the party establishment, and influential Democrats openly said it was her turn. Sanders was in the race as a protest candidate. Not only was he considered a marginal figure in Washington, lacking both connections and funding, but he did not have any of the characteristics that traditionally made one electable. He was from a tiny state known for hippies and cheese. He was old. He was not particularly photogenic, polished, or popular. And he was an avowed socialist in a country that had had a half-century Cold War between good American capitalism and evil Soviet socialism. It was not, however, a year in which the traditional criteria of electability would have mattered especially much. Sanders, perhaps as much to his own surprise as anyone else's, quickly attracted a significant following. His radical message, stingingly critical of the existing Democratic Party, resonated strongly with progressives who felt let down by Obama and viewed Clinton as part of an uninspiring and possibly corrupt political dynasty. When the first primary contest came around, February's 2016 Iowa caucuses, Sanders achieved a shockingly strong result, coming close to beating Clinton outright. As Sanders began to fill stadiums with crowds, attracting a highly visible and well-organized following, it quickly became clear that the race would not be the coronation that Clinton had anticipated. Clinton ultimately won the Democratic nomination, but it took a bruising fight. Sanders was no mere protest candidate. He was a serious competitor who won 23 contests to Clinton's 34. While Clinton received over 16 million votes across the various primaries, Sanders achieved a remarkable 13 million. It was surprising enough that a socialist candidate could be anything more than a gadfly in a major party nominating contest. It was downright stunning that such a candidate could rack up nearly 24 primary victories against one of the most experienced and well-connected members of the Democratic Party. Sanders' unexpected rise to prominence represented an extraordinary shift in the political landscape. The nearest precedent was Eugene Debs' 1920 presidential run on the Socialist Party ticket. Debs achieved nearly 1 million votes despite being in prison for defying the World War I draft. But even Debs didn't pose a serious electoral threat to the dominant parties, receiving only 3% of the general election vote. Sanders, who once recorded a spoken-word Eugene Debs tribute album and kept a portrait of Debs in his office while mayor of Burlington, Vermont, achieved a far greater measure of success. He may not have started the political revolution that he often spoke of, but he came relatively close to poaching the presidential nomination from the party elite's pre-selected candidate. The Sanders campaign was fueled by millennials whose dissatisfaction with mainstream Democrats made them highly responsive to Sanders' progressive message. Clinton may have had more support than Sanders overall, but young people of all races and genders preferred Sanders over Clinton by large margins. With the exception of Lena Dunham, it was hard to find many people under 30 who had much enthusiasm for Clinton, a candidate they associated with Wall Street cronyism and the Iraq disaster. Sanders' success with millennials, while unanticipated by pollsters, did not occur purely because of Sanders' political skill. It happened because a revolt had been brewing among young progressives for years, as they had steadily grown more and more alienated from the Democratic Party mainstream. Ever since the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, young people in the United States have become increasingly radicalized, weighted down with debt, paying through the nose for health insurance, unable to afford to have kids, and frustrated by an undemocratic political system that implements the policy preferences of rich elites. Millennials were both frustrated and tired. Sanders came along at just the right moment. They had been waiting for someone to say what was on their minds, that the economic and political systems were unfair at their core and needed a drastic overhaul. But the Sanders campaign was just the start. Joe Crowley had been in Congress for 20 years and was one of the highest-ranking members of the House Democrats. He was considered a serious contender for the party leadership and known in his New York district as a well-connected part of the local Democratic machine. He was the sort of backroom deal-making congressman whose influence is disproportionate to his name recognition. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was not an important figure in the Democratic Party. Far from it. She was a 28-year-old bartender and activist who had once interned for Ted Kennedy and had worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign. A member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, she was considered the longest of long shots in her primary contest against Crowley. Crowley had endorsements from powerful political organizations like the AFL-CIO, the Human Rights Campaign, and Planned Parenthood. And it goes on from there. Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan Robinson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It is a remarkable day. Of course, it's the day that we honor and celebrate the legacy of Dr. King. And so, of course, white supremacists are rallying, to rant about guns in Virginia. Surprise, surprise. There's a lot going on. I want to get into, obviously we've got some, sadly, Trump news today. The New York Post has endorsed two candidates for president. We'll get to that. And as I said, it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Rowan Kenyatta, who writes regularly for op-ed news and frequently calls into this program, has published an op-ed over at Op-Ed News today. What would MLK think today? And I think it's fascinating. He says, he points out this is the first and only national holiday honoring a black man. The first time was 34 years ago, January 20th, 1986. He says, I think Dr. King would be astonished at the fact that the United States is involved and has been involved in perpetual wars. One of Dr. King's last speeches was entitled Beyond Vietnam. He would be astonished to see the millions of innocent people killed, in all these years since his day, many of them children, by the United States as a result of these wars. He'd be astonished at the number of black people in America who continue to be summarily executed via extrajudicial process by state assassins. So the cops are still killing black people. The social metrics, Kenyatta points out, are not significantly changed, are in many cases worse. Police abuse, misconduct, inferior schools, unemployment, poverty, poor health care, discrimination, incarceration. He'd be perplexed that the United States has sunken to a level of moral depravity that would allow an imbecilic racist pig to be elected president in the wake of the Obama presidency. I agree. I think Dr. King would be alarmed by the State of the Union. And we're going to, actually, Joe Madison is going to drop by in the second hour of our program, and we're going to get into a little more extended conversation of all of these issues having to do with the state of race in America and where we're at and how we're going forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing Joe's thoughts on those things. So, your thoughts on the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, certainly you're more than welcome to call in and share your thoughts on this. I'm also rather surprised that Donald Trump, while refusing to brief Congress, there's this so-called Gang of Eight. It's the two Democratic, the two leaders, one Democrat, one Republican, of the House Intelligence Committee, and the two leaders of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then the Speaker of the House and the head of the Senate and the number two Democrat in the House, and the Republican leader of the House and the Democratic leader of the Senate, or the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. This is the so-called Gang of Eight, basically. Trump didn't brief them. No, we're not going to tell you. Maybe it's not intelligence, it's defense. But in any case, Trump did not brief them. Trump did not brief Congress. What Trump did is he briefed a group of people at Mar-A-lago. about the assassination of Soleimani. He never briefed the senior officials in the House and Senate, the Gang of Eight. Said he gave his briefing to high-dollar donors in Florida, essentially bragging that he didn't even need a reason to assassinate a foreign leader, that the guy was talking bad about America. Can you imagine if Barack Obama had done something like that? You know, I'm going to kill somebody who's talking smack on the United States. Right. That would be instant impeachment. I mean, you know, they went nuts when he wore a tan suit, right? When he saluted with a cup of coffee in his hand. So here we have, you know, Donald Trump. I mean, this is, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this too. What are the biggest challenges that we're going to face 1 year from today? And not just the new president and the new Congress, assuming that there's a new president, but you and me, all of us. What challenges do we face going forward, essentially either reinventing America or transforming America? I mean, this is kind of at the essence of what the New York Times is talking about today in their endorsement of Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. Every 4 years, the New York Times and, you know, all the major newspapers do this. They endorse candidates for president, and you know, local statewide newspapers endorse candidates for the Senate and governor and things like that. And they point out that there are three sharply divergent visions of America. And I find it really interesting that they made this trifurcation. There's the Donald Trump vision of America, which, to quote the New York Times, white nativism at home, America first unilateralism abroad, brazen corruption, escalating culture wars, a judiciary stacked with ideologues, and the veneration of a mythological past where the hierarchy in American society was defined and unchallenged. In other words, women knew their place, people of color knew their place, class divisions were clear, and you know, everybody just needs to go back to that, right? This is, you know, Donald Trump's vision of America is essentially the John Birch Society in the 1960s, reacting against everything from Brown v. Board in 1954 all the way up to the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of the mid-1960s. So you've got that vision, which is currently the entire Republican Party. And then you've got these two visions represented by Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren, according to the New York Times. And they make the point that these two visions are basically, Klobuchar is saying that Trump is an aberration. It was just an accident that he was elected president, or it was the result of, you know, Russian interference or something, but it's not a normal thing. And we just need to return to normal. This is how the New York Times is characterizing Amy Klobuchar's understanding of the political moment. And that we return to normal by going back to the times when Democrats and Republicans worked together to slowly but measurably improve life in America. Now, in my memory, and I've been around a long time, that would be pre-1980. Because these huge ideological and political divisions, in my mind, just, you know, started with the Reagan administration in 1981. So you've got that. And then on the other side, you've got Elizabeth Warren, the New York Times says, who is just coming right out and saying, well, quoting the New York Times, President Trump was the product of political and economic systems so rotten that they must be replaced. Now, one of the things I thought was most interesting in the New York Times endorsement or op-ed or whatever was, they say Democrats must decide which of these two models would be most compelling for the American people and best suited for repairing the republic. And, you know, feel free to weigh in on that. without trashing one candidate or the other, please. I really want to avoid the circular firing squad. But if you want to speak on behalf of one candidate or the other, feel free. Or any other Democratic candidate. The New York Times passed over Bernie, saying that he would be 79, his health is a serious concern, and he boasts that compromise is anathema to him. And you should read the op-ed. It's fascinating. I'm not, I'm of the opinion that Bernie Sanders is a good candidate too, who could win just as easily as Elizabeth Warren or Amy Klobuchar. But what I find fascinating about this entire thing is this idea that there are these three visions of America. Because, I would argue that Elizabeth Warren's vision of America right now, that our systems are corrupted and broken, was essentially Franklin Roosevelt's vision of America and Harry Truman's. And to a very, very large extent, John Kennedy's and Lyndon Johnson's, when they took on, head on racism in America, the poverty in America, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King. I would say that vision that Dr. King represented is the vision that says, no, America is broken. It's been broken for a long time. But it's particularly broken right now, I think he would say, although I can't deign to speak for him, here or not. And I think that the vision that America isn't broken, that it just needs some tweaking and some careful thought and deliberate and let's get back to normal, that was the Republicans prior to 1980. And it was the Democrats under Bill Clinton and Barack Obama to a certain extent. And I don't mean that as a hit. I mean, this is just incremental change, which is kind of the definition of conservative. Incremental change is a good thing, and I'm not opposed to incremental change. I get it. And I think if Amy Klobuchar was president, I think she'd do a great job. And Elizabeth Warren, president, do a great job. Or frankly, pretty much any of the Democrats who are running, seriously running. So, a lot on our plates here right now. I also want to get into Lev Parnas and Bill Barr and all that kind of stuff. So much going on. Anyhow, we'll be back. It's coming up on 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Martin Luther King Day. It is also, tomorrow actually, is the beginning of the official impeachment process of Donald Trump. And Mitch McConnell is saying, we're going to bury everything after midnight, right?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
He apparently wants the Senate sessions to go until 2 a.m., and they're going to ban most cameras and all reporters. Brilliant. And welcome back. Let's see here. Michael in Oakland, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hello, Michael.
Look, we the people own America. Donald Trump is just one person chosen for this particular journey right now, today. Dr. King, I'm 73 years old this year, and Dr. King, I'm from Chicago originally, and Dr. King had a lot to say about bringing people together with love. Donald Trump is evil. He's very evil. He's trying to bring us back to the times of the Civil War, All minorities make up this country. It's so very important that black people hold hands and pray and stay together during this time. We own the country, not Donald damn Trump and his gangster friends.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And gangster is it. Thank you very much. And in fact, that, Lev Parnas is now saying he's more afraid of Bill Barr than he is of foreign oligarchs that he has thrown under the bus. Foreign oligarchs who in some cases have been implicated in deaths. I mean, but Bill Barr scares him more? Whoa. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. Hey, Marta, what's on your mind today?
I was just listening to Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech on Democracy Now! Is it called Beyond Vietnam?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's just I've never heard anything so wonderful. It wasn't about just peace and love and let's all work together. It was actually confronting militarism, poverty, and racism. I think he called those the three greatest evils. And my question is, who embodies those values? Who embodies that courage? Martin Luther King Jr. confronted militarism. He didn't play party politics, and he pushed the Kennedys to look at issues that they were not really willing to take on, and he pushed it forward. And to me, and so did FDR and some of the other most greatest people. When I was studying English composition, working on my master's, I learned about consensus and dissensus. And consensus is great, but it will not achieve progress without dissensus. And Martin Luther King Jr. worked not from the inside, from the outside. It's time for us to have courage because, both parties are militaristic. The Republicans are worse, but we have to stop this. And 55% of our discretionary budget going to a lot of it, the highly lucrative defense industry. We don't need that. We need health care and free college. So absolutely, Bernie Sanders is the one with that courage, and he has worked with the Democratic Party. He hasn't been just, uncooperative, and that is just a lie.
Yeah.
So
he's also worked with Republicans in the past, too. Things like, he worked with Ron Paul to get the Pentagon audited, for goodness sake.
Absolutely. So the lie by the corporate media is that he doesn't cooperate enough. And there's a reason they're saying that, because they love militarism.
Yeah. I get it. Marta, thank you very much for the call. Good to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I think it's NBC News. It might be somebody else has dug up this quote from 1998. Alan Dershowitz, this was during the Clinton impeachment. Alan Dershowitz saying about whether or not a president has to have committed an actual crime to be impeached. Because having sex with an intern isn't a crime. Lying about it under oath is, but is that an impeachable crime? Well, the Senate didn't think so, but the House did. But here's what Alan Dershowitz said in 1998. It certainly doesn't have to be a crime if you have somebody who completely corrupts the office of president and who abuses trust and who poses great danger to our liberty. You don't need a technical crime. That was August 24th, 1998. And then, of course, over the weekend, you couldn't turn on a TV without seeing Alan Dershowitz. It was like, regardless of channel, regardless of time, I am so sick of seeing this man's face. And, this is just one of his quotes. Abuse of power, even if proved, is not an impeachable offense. The framers didn't want to give Congress the authority to remove a president because he abused his power. You have to prove crimes and misdemeanors. Well, let's see what the founders actually said about this. This is from James Madison's Notes on the Constitutional Convention. Mr. Pinckney observed that the president ought not to be impeachable while in office. Mr. Davey then stands up and says if he's not impeachable while in office, he'll spare no effort or means whatever to get himself reelected. He considered this an essential security, impeachment, for the good behavior of the president. Colonel Mason, no point is of more importance than that the right of the impeachment should be continued. Shall a man who has practiced corruption, and by that means procured his appointment to the presidency, be suffered to escape punishment by repeating his guilt? Ben Franklin, Dr. Franklin was for retaining the impeachment clause as favorable to the executive. Ben Franklin pointed out, what was the practice before this, before the possibility of impeachment, in cases where the chief magistrate rendered himself obnoxious? Why recourse was had to assassination, as Ben Franklin said. Franklin says impeachment is a much better way. It would be the best way, therefore, to provide in the Constitution for the regular punishment of the executive, where his misconduct should deserve it, and for his honorable acquittal, where he should be unjustly accused. Governor Morris admits corruption and other offenses should be impeachable. James Madison thought it indispensable that some provision should be made for defending the community against the perfidy or negligence of a chief magistrate, of a president. He might pervert his administration, Madison said, into a scheme of peculation. Peculation is when you make yourself wealthy through public money. Madison thought this was an impeachable offense. He might pervert his administration into a scheme of peculation or oppression. Eldridge Gerry, the guy that we named, the gerrymander is named after, urged the necessity of impeachment. A good magistrate would not fear them. A good president will not fear them. A bad one ought to be kept in fear of them. And it goes on, Mr. Randolph, wherever found, if he's guilty, he ought to be punished. The executive, the president, will have great opportunities of abusing his power, particularly in time of war, when the military force and in some respects the public money will be in his hands. Are we thinking about $400 million for Ukraine here? Should no regular punishments be provided, it will be irregularly inflicted by tumults and insurrections. So we must have an impeachment. Franklin comes back to, he talks about the Prince of Orange, who led his country into a war. Had he been impeachable, a regular and peaceable inquiry would have taken place, and he would, if guilty, have been duly punished. If innocent, restored to the confidence of the public. So the founders were quite clear that impeachment did not require a crime. And by the way, there were no federal crimes when the Constitution was ratified. The Constitution provided for Congress to start creating
You're listening
crimes.
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or at least creating the laws that define crimes and the punishments for violating those laws. So literally, at the time the Constitution was ratified, there were no federal crimes. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today is Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan J. Robinson. This is from the introduction. In the last few years, U.S. politics has become completely upended. The presidency of Donald Trump, which took politicians and commentators by total surprise, shattered a number of Washington orthodoxies. Very few experts thought that a vicious, loutish reality TV star was capable of rising to the nation's highest office. But they had misjudged political reality and forgot the cardinal rule: anything can happen. Trump's improbable rise to power was not the only political irregularity to occur over the last several years. While Trump was defeating the most powerful figures in the country's two major political parties, another unexpected phenomenon was occurring: the rise of a new radicalism on the left. When Bernie Sanders began his campaign for the 2016 presidential nomination, nobody expected him to pose a serious challenge to Hillary Clinton. Clinton was the consensus choice of the party establishment, and influential Democrats openly said it was her turn. Sanders was in the race as a protest candidate. Not only was he considered a marginal figure in Washington, lacking both connections and funding, but he did not have any of the characteristics that traditionally made one electable. He was from a tiny state known for hippies and cheese. He was old. He was not particularly photogenic, polished, or popular. And he was an avowed socialist in a country that had had a half-century Cold War between good American capitalism and evil Soviet socialism. It was not, however, a year in which the traditional criteria of electability would have mattered especially much. Sanders, perhaps as much to his own surprise as anyone else's, quickly attracted a significant following. His radical message, stingingly critical of the existing Democratic Party, resonated strongly with progressives who felt let down by Obama and viewed Clinton as part of an uninspiring and possibly corrupt political dynasty. When the first primary contest came around, February's 2016 Iowa caucuses, Sanders achieved a shockingly strong result, coming close to beating Clinton outright. As Sanders began to fill stadiums with crowds, attracting a highly visible and well-organized following, it quickly became clear that the race would not be the coronation that Clinton had anticipated. Clinton ultimately won the Democratic nomination, but it took a bruising fight. Sanders was no mere protest candidate. He was a serious competitor who won 23 contests to Clinton's 34. While Clinton received over 16 million votes across the various primaries, Sanders achieved a remarkable 13 million. It was surprising enough that a socialist candidate could be anything more than a gadfly in a major party nominating contest. It was downright stunning that such a candidate could rack up nearly 24 primary victories against one of the most experienced and well-connected members of the Democratic Party. Sanders' unexpected rise to prominence represented an extraordinary shift in the political landscape. The nearest precedent was Eugene Debs' 1920 presidential run on the Socialist Party ticket. Debs achieved nearly 1 million votes despite being in prison for defying the World War I draft. But even Debs didn't pose a serious electoral threat to the dominant parties, receiving only 3% of the general election vote. Sanders, who once recorded a spoken-word Eugene Debs tribute album and kept a portrait of Debs in his office while mayor of Burlington, Vermont, achieved a far greater measure of success. He may not have started the political revolution that he often spoke of, but he came relatively close to poaching the presidential nomination from the party elite's pre-selected candidate. The Sanders campaign was fueled by millennials whose dissatisfaction with mainstream Democrats made them highly responsive to Sanders' progressive message. Clinton may have had more support than Sanders overall, but young people of all races and genders preferred Sanders over Clinton by large margins. With the exception of Lena Dunham, it was hard to find many people under 30 who had much enthusiasm for Clinton, a candidate they associated with Wall Street cronyism and the Iraq disaster. Sanders' success with millennials, while unanticipated by pollsters, did not occur purely because of Sanders' political skill. It happened because a revolt had been brewing among young progressives for years, as they had steadily grown more and more alienated from the Democratic Party mainstream. Ever since the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, young people in the United States have become increasingly radicalized, weighted down with debt, paying through the nose for health insurance, unable to afford to have kids, and frustrated by an undemocratic political system that implements the policy preferences of rich elites. Millennials were both frustrated and tired. Sanders came along at just the right moment. They had been waiting for someone to say what was on their minds, that the economic and political systems were unfair at their core and needed a drastic overhaul. But the Sanders campaign was just the start. Joe Crowley had been in Congress for 20 years and was one of the highest-ranking members of the House Democrats. He was considered a serious contender for the party leadership and known in his New York district as a well-connected part of the local Democratic machine. He was the sort of backroom deal-making congressman whose influence is disproportionate to his name recognition. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was not an important figure in the Democratic Party. Far from it. She was a 28-year-old bartender and activist who had once interned for Ted Kennedy and had worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign. A member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, she was considered the longest of long shots in her primary contest against Crowley. Crowley had endorsements from powerful political organizations like the AFL-CIO, the Human Rights Campaign, and Planned Parenthood. And it goes on from there. Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan Robinson. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters Series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 35 minutes past the hour. Karen in Waynesville, North Carolina. Hey, Karen, welcome to the program.
Hey, Tom. How you doing today?
I am fine, thank you. I hope you are too.
Good. Yeah, I have a family story about Dr. King I wanted to share today.
Okay.
I'm a third-generation pacifist. My grandmother became a pacifist after World War I. She was a suffragette. But anyway, my mother back in the 50s was the vice president of the NAACP, and we're white. And I think at that time the NAACP was not kind of all black. I mean, there were a lot of other people that were members of different colors. So anyway, back in the 50s, she was vice president of the NAACP, and Dr. King came to Columbus, Ohio, where we lived, and I was a toddler, so I wasn't part of this, but my next older sister went to the event, and she was probably 5 or 6 years old. And at the end of the speech, they were passing around the collection plates, and he said, "Now, I know some of you don't have $1 in your pocket, but if you'll come up and give me the change out of your pocket, I'll give you $1 to put in the collection plate." And so my sister trotted up with her coins and gave them to him. He gave her $1 to put in the collection plate.
Wow.
Yeah. And so there's a couple pictures, in the family albums of my mom with Dr. King, and the day he gave the I Have a Dream speech, the entire family just sat and watched him. My mom had tears running down her cheeks the whole time. I mean, it was just an amazing moment.
Yeah. He was an extraordinary man. Karen, that's a great story. Thank you so much for calling and sharing it with us. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep. David in Miami. Hey, David, what's up?
Hello, Professor. Yes, your YouTube question was, what would Martin Luther King say or ask? I say he would ask, where is the basic income that Nixon and Friedman agreed on? Where are the jobs and justice I marched for? Yeah,
ironically, basic income was something Milton Friedman, who probably most of the bad things about our economy can be traced back to, but, that was something that for a while he was a champion of. And, I think that, basic income, or at least ending poverty, would be right at the top of the list. Thank you, David. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First off, I respect you. Got a lot of love for you. But I got to say something. I understand because Joe Biden said it best. White people in general do not understand and will not be able to understand racism. So I understand why you can't you see it, but you don't see it. Even you do. You see it, but you don't see it. This country, as a black man, this country never was right. It never was fixed.
Sure.
It started off with people who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitutions and the Article of the Constitutions, but they all had money.
Well, and half of them owned slaves.
The Constitution from a billionaire standpoint, because at that time they were today's billionaire would be back then, because if you owned human bodies, you were that rich back then. Adjusted for inflation. So, if you read the Constitution like a billionaire, well, yeah, they wrote it right. But you say the founding fathers, and it's glass in my veins when you say it. Because I know the truth about all of them so-called founding fathers. And if my father was anything like that, I would have assassinated him.
Yeah, I get it. And John, you're absolutely right. I mean, I have no shortage of my own blind spots, and I'm sure that that's true of probably the vast expanse of the vast number of white people. John, thank you. Kenyatta, hey, I was quoting from your article to start the show. Welcome.
Hey, Tom, listen, you know something? We have a mutual friend. And I was on my way. I was commuting to my office this morning, and I got this text message that you had given my article a plug on your show. And I got to tell you, I had to pull over. I was shocked, and I'm very honored. I wanted to thank you for that.
I was reading from it.
As a result,
you wrote a good piece. It's over at opednews.com if people want to read it.
That's outstanding. Thank you, sir. And I do want to say this. Because of your show, over the years, I have come into contact with some very, very intelligent, very powerful thinkers. You don't know how much stuff that you affect under the waves that happens.
Well, thanks. You want to recap your piece? What would MLK think today? That's over at opednews.com.
Well, I don't want to do that, Tom, because actually, if anyone wants to read it, they can read it. It's not a very long piece, but I do want to say this about MLK. I think that were he alive today, he would be very disappointed, as I mentioned in the article, that so much not only has not changed since the time that the I Have a Dream speech, which, in and of itself, constantly being propped up, to me, indicates white supremacy, because he made several other speeches that were very critical of the United States, not talking about dreams. As I mentioned in the piece, in order to dream, you have to be asleep. Dreams cannot be realized. You must be asleep to dream. Yeah. And so if were he alive today, he would find not only that his dream was a dream, but in fact, it was a fantasy. And I will tell you this. He would not only be surprised at the country and disappointed, I think, at the country at large, he would be particularly, and I'm going to step out here and get myself in a lot of trouble on this one, Mr. Hartmann, but he would be particularly upset with black people in this country. He would be upset with us that we allow our young people to listen to music where references to women are the B word and references to one another are the N word. He would be very upset with that. When you look back at the time, and a lot of people don't know this, as before Martin's assassination, he was moving further or closer and closer to a Malcolm X type philosophy. The holiday itself, to me, is a form of appeasement. And you had a caller on just a moment ago. I think his name was John. And when he said it's like glass going through his veins, every time he hears our founding fathers, it's one thing for me to hear white people say that. And if white people are proud of what they have done in America and they're proud of this country, they have every right to be. But what insults me is when they expect me to feel like they do, when they expect me to stand for that flag, knowing what that flag has done to my people. That is what's insulting. And when I hear black people sit up and talk about our Constitution, you are the only people in this country that weren't part of that Constitution because you were property. And that's never been rectified legally. No one's ever told me that somehow that changed. So you see, this legacy continues. And I think that that were Martin alive today, he would not be pleased at all.
Yeah.
Across the board.
I get it. Certainly, his Beyond Vietnam speech and many of his other comments on in particular on poverty and Poor People's Campaign and everything that he was doing, so many of those efforts have basically been just even taken apart in the last few decades. It's astonishing. Kenyatta, thanks for the call.
Quantitatively in the last few years, yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom.
Yeah, good talking to you. And Kenyatta's piece is over at opednews.com, opednews.com. It's titled "What MLK Would Think Today." Tony in Bowie, Maryland. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I think Dr. King. Well, first of all, I agree with the gentleman before. Yeah, Dr. King would be upset about that because Dr. King also mentioned too that he thought we were integrating into a burning house. But also, I don't know if I heard this on your show or on one of the other shows. This doctrine of discovery.
Oh yeah.
I think he would be asking about that. Because that's the basis for all this stuff that we're going through and continues to be the basis. And the Supreme Court holds up some of these decisions as recently as just 2011 or 2005 or something.
Well, the doctrine of discovery goes back to the Pope. I mean, in the 11th century, I think.
I understand, but Tom, there are probably 95% of the people in this country who've never heard of that unless they're Catholic. Yeah. There are preachers who go to seminary schools who've never heard of that. We've been to school, we've been educated, we got PhDs and all these. 95% of the people have never heard of this stuff. This is what should be taught in our schools instead of this Columbus stuff. And as far as the Constitution, yes, I think it's a good document for white land-owning men. So this is what I think he would be talking about. I'm not even sure Dr. King had even heard about the doctrine of discovery during his time. And he might even be arguing now, instead of for civil rights, for sovereignty. We should, because all of our stuff, everything that we've owned and produced and are good at, that everybody else, white folks, make profit off of. Yeah. So we need to wake up as a country. And certainly as black people, we need to understand this stuff. And I think in the book, I read the doctrine of discovery. In the book...
Finish your thought, Tony.
No, in the book it says, that the people who did this to us are traumatized because of what they've done. And you know what I call this? I call this the unconscious, racist subconscious of white America.
There you go. Tony, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls on this day in which we remember the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Terry in Marion Station, Maryland. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm a first-time caller, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
My question is what your view is on how we combat some of this, I know it's difficult, but this right-wing rhetoric, because it doesn't matter, even people I'm close to that I talk to, it gets frustrating, because you could even talk facts with people, but if they're on any other platform or anything, all they'll say to me or their response is either, Republican talking points, or they will say that's because you watch CNN or whatever. So it gets a little frustrating because you try to, open up the door and you just see the door and the divide getting bigger. So I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, it's kind of the balkanization of our politics. We have... and I think that you can track this back to the 1970s and the Powell memo, when Lewis Powell said to the business oligarchs in America, to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, his friend Eugene Sindor, he said, we've got to take over the media. We've got to buy media. We've got to take over the schools. We've got to start investing. We've got to basically buy professorships in colleges. We've got to edit the textbooks in our high schools and elementary schools. Business people and billionaires need to get active in politics. We need to build think tanks that can fill the minds of Americans with these right-wing, pro-billionaire stories and memes and things. And they did that. And one of the things and the GOP just totally bought into that. And one of the things that the Republican Party figured out was that if you're constantly pitching the interests of the wealthy, most people are not going to be with you. So, they brought along the racists, they brought along the religious freaks, they brought, and I use that word intentionally, and the misogynists, and, they basically created this, hardcore right-wing coalition that now, lives on as Trumpism, and it has a media arm. Fox News on television, and right-wing hate radio on radio, and no shortage of websites, and increasingly Facebook now. Judd Legum has a great piece at popular.info today about how Facebook is continuing to promote not just racism, but open threats against people of color, calling for lynching and things, right now and alive there. So I don't know what to do with people who live in that universe, Terry. They're brainwashed, and it's a tough one. Somebody yesterday on TV, and I'm sorry I don't remember which show it was or who it was, but just repeatedly was saying you can hate Trump, but you can't hate the people who support Trump.
I think that was Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, or no, it was Bill Maher actually on his show.
Oh, and Bill Maher,
Nancy Pelosi was agreeing with him. That's right. Yeah, because Louise and I watched that show yesterday, and I don't know. I'm still kind of torn about that because the people who support Trump are right now marching in Virginia with guns and putting up websites calling for the lynching of black public officials, elected officials. So Facebook pages, and it's just I think we need to draw some serious lines here. Terry, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Wes in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for taking my call.
Sure.
I just try to keep a positive attitude about things, but it annoys me when I hear three black men in succession say the same thing, and I ain't understand a damn thing they said.
What do you mean?
The point that they tried to make. Concerning racism, they called into a white talk show and tried to explain to a white man their frustrations with the white man and how the white man has did this and that and the other. I want to see the positive things that I can do. I read a prayer that says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You have to analyze these things on an individual basis other than try to group everything in one lump sum or try to criticize a said person. Just like you said, as Miss Nancy Pelosi says, you can't, hate people that vote for Trump and whatnot. Hell, you go around with all kind of hate all the time.
Yeah. Well, the hate is corrosive, to yourself. I agree, Wes. But on the other hand, what's the appropriate response to somebody who puts up a Facebook post calling for the lynching of an African-American state representative? I mean, that's
no
happening.
Response. It's no response. It's ignorance. And to feed into it, you're going to come out with a negative yourself.
You're right.
So two negatives, there's no way, going to get anything positive out of it. So, I mean, it's attitude daily, constantly, You have to analyze these things, man, and not keep on crying about it. Do something. Do something. If it's just something for yourself, other than just, complaining about the same thing about the white man. Because the white man ain't no change. You ain't no changing. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wes. Well, I think, I think some people can learn, but change, I don't know. Boy, what a topic. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I have to kind of disagree with your last caller a little bit. I think we can affect some change, and it's very important.
Oh, I don't think he wasn't saying change. He was saying have the wisdom to know the difference between what you can and can't change.
Well, let me go into this, and I'll tell you why. First of all, though, I'd like to say, thanks to Paul and Dave in Washington, Norman, Alabama, and Kenyatta. They're great. I enjoy their calls all the time. And one thing, too, Dr. King, he wasn't just for black people. He was for working people across the United States.
You're right.
And white people, they never got that memo, A lot of them didn't. Some did. 50% didn't. But anyways, I want to talk about where that we can go to affect that change. Number one, I'm for Bernie. You probably know that. But we're never going to get Republicans to work with us and to get this change to happen. What we need to do is get all three branches of the government, the Senate, the Congress, and the President, the situation. They've been stonewalling us since Barack Obama took office. The day he took office 11 years ago, right near to the day here. And they had that caucus room meeting. And Mitch McConnell and them, they've been instructing everything that Obama wanted to do for the whole 8 years of his presidency. And right now, we've got 275 bills sitting on Moscow Mitch's desk, which he is not going to do nothing about. And, it really doesn't matter who's going to be president, whether it's Amy Klobuchar, Bernie, or whoever of the Dems, if we don't get all three branches. And
I agree.
Whoever it is, they will stonewall just like they did Obama.
Well, I wouldn't agree that it would. Nothing's going to happen, but we really need to take all three branches of government, because you're absolutely right. Mitch McConnell has been following up on the caucus room conspiracy rhetoric or plan. Actually, I mean, it was an actual strategy, and which you can track down. I mean, you can just Google caucus room conspiracy, and you'll see the same thing. Steve, thanks for the call. Greg in Issaquah, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Tom, I was just wondering, with respect to what Mitch McConnell's doing, suppressing, and it looks like they're going to block in this Democrat witch hunt. Which next path will it take? And let me clarify: there's so many likely branches of corruption. Which do you hunt? So.
Yeah,
I was just trying to get your sense of this. It's Stormy Daniels stuff, the Deutsche Bank records.
Oh, it continues. I mean, just this weekend, he's briefing high-end donors in Florida about military raids that he won't discuss with Congress. I mean, it's like, how how much more can we take, and B, how do we repair ourselves? How do we repair our country from the damage that not just Donald Trump, but Donald Trump and his billionaire buddies have inflicted on this country? Yeah. And
I'm just saying,
I was
just saying, I want to get the evidence out of all the different things so people can, in the next election, can decide.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that the next election produces some really dramatic change. I have a strong sense that it will, but on the other hand, day after day after day, we see, West Virginia just threw a couple 100,000 people off the voting rolls aggressively in the cities, in the places that vote for Democrats. Hundreds of thousands of people in West Virginia. Ohio did it a while ago, and the Supreme Court said, it's just fine. I mean, it's going to be a tough election because these guys are rigging the table.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, MD, as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty. His Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane." In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, And were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters Series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Joe Madison is going to be with us in probably 15 minutes or so. He's at a speaking gig, and it's running a little long, so we're going to get him on the phone in a little bit. In the meantime, we'll continue our conversation about Martin Luther King and this day and its meaning and you know, the state of things in the United States. Gretchen in Salem, Virginia. Hey, Gretchen, your state is going through something today.
Yes, absolutely. And, so I'm for sensible gun rights, and so would MLK, but I'm calling to say he would add environmental justice, because we have 8 or 9 or 10 years left before the global heating changes are irreversible. And I want to let everybody know about a book called Root Shock by Mindy Fullilove, Fullilove, from Rutgers. She talks about in 1950 to the 80s in Pittsburgh, Newark, and Roanoke, Virginia, there was incredible environmental devastation. 200 businesses, 900 homes were burned, torn down, 200 bodies were transferred to a mass grave at 460 East Botetourt, and there's only 3 statues there now about it. They completely destroyed Henry Street, which was a thriving black area here, and I've been here about 20 years, and I didn't know this happened until I found out about this book yesterday.
How did this happen? And why?
So it was gentrification in the Gainsborough area of Roanoke. Read the book, Tom. Root Shock by Mindy Fullilove, Fullilove. The person who gave this talk was at the Poor People's Campaign, the inaugural Southwestern Virginia event, and we need people to step up to the plate. If voters are off the rolls, we need to get them back on. And
whoop, I'm sorry. I just dropped the caller by accident and put on Johnny. Johnny in Galveston, Texas. You're on the air, Johnny.
Hey, Tom. I wanted to appreciate Kenyatta's comments before, because he's not alone. As a second-generation Italian-American growing up in New York City in the 60s and 70s, when we had to do our mandatory everyday salute and pledge of allegiance to the flag, often the rhetoric would come up about our founding fathers in history class, and I could not relate to that because, as the son of an immigrant grandparent, I didn't relate to that. And Italian Americans, from my point of view, didn't really become really accepted until like late 1979, 1980.
Yeah.
Don't forget 1960.
Yeah,
when I was born. That was only 15 years after World War II.
Yeah.
In which Italy was on the enemy side, the Axis side.
Yeah, I get it.
There's that history piece.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a fascinating book called "When the Irish Became White" that talks about this phenomena. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I appreciate all the callers. I always learn so much from you, and even the callers I disagree with. I wanted to emphasize that. And, the trial of the century is about to start, and I have jury duty this week. So,
are you serious? You're not facetiously. Okay, good. Well, good luck with that.
I do. Yeah, thanks. And it's a trial of the century because it affects the entire world, okay? And I know people are already probably saying, this is going to be a yawner. It's a kangaroo court. Yes, but look, Donald Trump's defense track, as I understand it, is twofold. One is they're saying that abuse of power is not impeachable. The other is they're straight up saying this is a coup against the President of the United States. The problem is abuse of power, really? I mean, arguably, we're no longer a democratic republic. I mean, power has been gravitating, for lack of a better word, towards the executive branch for years. You know this. How can you abuse almost unlimited power? How can you do that? And then this thing about this is a coup. I mean, I am a foreign intelligence expert, okay? I mean, I'm sorry. I say that with humility, all right? But here's the reality. This is dangerous. We are sending signals to two countries. All right, Ari Ravenhoff told me a couple years ago that Russia is nothing but a third world, a gas station. That's what he told me. That's not true. And I respect Ari Ravenhoff. Russia does not, and let's say it is true, they don't realize they are, okay? We are sending, the President of the United States and his legal team is possibly sending signals to the Kremlin and Beijing that there is a coup underway. There's only one way. They're the only ones that can stop it, all right? That's how they're going to receive that. That's how they're going to receive that.
I'm not sure they're that unsophisticated, Dave. I get your point, but I'm far more concerned with the signals he's sending about American unilateralism and American non-intervention and blowing up alliances and all those kinds of things. Those all trouble me very much. Dave, I got to run. Thank you very much for the call. Joe Madison is on the line with us. Our friend who is and colleague who does his show every morning on Sirius XM on channel 126, Sirius XM channel 126, civil rights activist, joemadison.com, the website. You can tweet him at Madison Sirius XM. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
It's just fine, yeah. And thank you for joining the program today. I wanted to get your thoughts on not just Martin Luther King Day specifically, but more broadly, the state of America. I mean, as we are speaking, it's Martin Luther King Day, and there's a bunch of white supremacists rallying in Virginia, heavily armed.
Well, there's no irony there. The reality is that this is something they choose to do. Let me start with something I just told a group of people about what this should all be about if we're going to remember and deal with the legacy of Dr. King. One thing I would strongly suggest, if your audience hasn't done it and others, is you should read his last book, which was titled "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" And it was his fourth and last book before he was assassinated. And he talked about the importance of African Americans and white liberals getting together and pressing what he called were two realities. That there had to be this coalition of blacks and liberal whites, and that they had to make sure that both political parties were responsive to our needs and the needs of poor people. But he also said we can't be oblivious to the fact that racism is going to be alive and well, and the reality is that it's not going to go anywhere, and it's probably going to spread as much in the North as it has in the South. I'm not really worried about these individuals in Richmond as much as I am worried about the fact that I don't think most of us are prepared to create a movement. I think we have these, and King talked about this, that we have these moments, a moment over here, a moment over here. What we have to be prepared to do is what Dr. King did and those around him. And that is, we must be prepared to create movements. And the difference between, Tom, a moment and a movement is sacrifice. You and and I'm telling you, that is really what was in. That's why he said, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Look, the reality is you have to be prepared, Thom Hartmann. Joe Madison has to be prepared, and others out here. We have to quit having these moments and start creating a movement, but we have to ask ourselves, what are we prepared to sacrifice? There has never been, as Dr. King wrote in the book, there has never been a movement in human history which did not require a sacrifice. And then there was something else I told the group this morning, today, that if you go to his book of sermons, the book is titled Strength to Love. And he said, nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what you have in Richmond today. That's what you had in Charlottesville. It's a combination, and that's why these folks are dangerous. They are sincerely ignorant of what this country has become and should become, and what's happening is that they're spreading conscientious stupidity, and that's what is really dangerous. And then I'll close with, I'll end at least this one part of the discussion with you to answer your question. There's something else he said, and I really live by this, that service is more important than success. People are more important than possessions, and principle is more important than power. And so after today, tomorrow, now let's be quite candid, tomorrow we are going to have to ask, will these senators in this impeachment trial, will they be principled, or will they just do what they have to stay in power? And I think that's what Dr. King, today he would have been, today he would have been 91 years old. So people always ask, what is his legacy? And I think really, quite honestly, that's it. And other than that, it's just been a day. We recognize him. And then the question is, what do we do tomorrow? And what are we willing to sacrifice? Am I willing to sacrifice my job? Are you willing? I hear your music, so I'll be quiet.
No, it's all good. In fact, I'd like to continue that conversation. And
sure.
That was, in fact, I made a note to myself to ask you, sacrifice what? Where do we start with this? Joe Madison is with us, who does his show on SiriusXM every weekday, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on SiriusXM channel 126. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Joe's website, by the way, joemadison.com. We'll be right back with Joe. And welcome back. Joe, we've lost our SiriusXM audience for 4 minutes during the commercial break and our commercial stations, but we're still on Pacifica stations all across the country, and we're still live on Free Speech TV all across the country. So let's continue the conversation here. You were mid-thought when the music hit, I think, or maybe you were wrapping it up.
I really was wrapping it up because I just think that we had, and at that last question you asked was a very interesting one. You know, what I think you wrote a note. What should we sacrifice?
Yeah, well, let's make this real. Let's talk about concrete examples. I mean, we all know what sacrifice has been done in the past. I mean, people have died. I mean, look at Martin Luther King himself, Dr. King himself. But what?
And let me tell you, and see there's where people see. That's the point. sacrifice. You know what? Yeah, you may end up having. Look, let me tell you something. When we went to Sudan, and we were on an airplane.
You and me. You mean.
When we were in South Sudan, we were targeted by the Sudan government. We were on airplanes that I think you may remember. Man, there was the fuel was in the same cabin with us. You know, because they had to take off that plane could have been shot out of that air any time.
Yep.
But we could have been targeted. We would have sacrificed our lives for those people. And therein lies, I think, part of the problem. Look, let's be quiet. We sit up here and talk about John Lewis. Oh, we love John Lewis. John Lewis almost sacrificed his life on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. John Lewis sacrificed his career. The young men who did the sit-ins at the lunch counter, they weren't PhD students. They weren't professors. They weren't even upperclassmen. They were all freshmen. And they got kicked out of school, never got their degree until they got it honorarily, decades later. People sacrificed their marriages. People sacrificed their careers. We forget that, you go marching down from Edmund Pettus Bridge to Montgomery, Alabama, at any time, you could have been attacked. And so look at what happens in Charlottesville. Those folks sacrificed their lives facing what now has become, and I said it again, and I mean it. This administration, and I don't care what Dr. Martin Luther King's niece says. I don't care what this transference. If I yell racism, then I'm a racist. Look, we've seen in the last 3 years that this administration has, in essence, brought racism from the closet to the front porch. And we're going to have to deal with this. So what is it going to take? Honestly, more than talk. And it means that, we've got to create a movement, and that movement is going to have some dangers to it.
It is. And we'll continue this conversation in just a second. Joe Madison is with us. JoeMadison.com is his website. You can check out his website. Check out his show on SiriusXM, 6 to 10 a.m., Monday through Friday, channel 126, Urban View. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour. Joe Madison is with us. Joe, we were talking a few minutes ago or you were talking specifically about sacrifice. And then during the break here, you and I were talking, and you mentioned, when you and I were in Sudan and what we were willing to sacrifice to be there. I just like a few hours, maybe an hour and a half ago, blocked another threat on Twitter. It astonishes me, the threats and sometimes open death threats that I get in email. I'm not trying to make myself out to be any kind of martyr, although Alan Berg was the last big national progressive talk show host who was murdered back in the day. But I'm sure that you're the recipient of that same kind of hate. We were talking about sacrifice, and I think that, not to make us out to be martyrs or anything like that, or even whatever. There's a level of sacrifice that individuals can engage in just at the level of confrontation. You mentioned that this administration has taken racism out of the closet and brought it to the front porch. And there's a debate about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's causing it to metastasize and spread and deepen and recruit, and I think there's no doubt about that, or on the other hand, if it's producing enough of a backlash, particularly among people of goodwill, that this could be its last gasp, or at least the current incarnation of it. What are your thoughts on all that, and how, you know, if somebody confronts racism head on, you know, that's a sacrifice right there, or at least, you know.
No. Look, first of all, catch what you're saying.
Yeah.
Nothing about racism is good. That's number one. Nothing is good. The reality is that the reality is. You have to eliminate it. You have to confront it. You have to be. Look, the reality is, join the club, man. I've been getting death threats before I began talk radio. Lord knows, with the trolls, we get it all the time. This comes with the territory. Now, here's what I mean by sacrifice. What would happen if? I'll give you an example. Sometimes you have to sacrifice your career. I worked at a radio station in Philadelphia where I was told by the president, owner, and the program director that I couldn't talk about black people on the air. I could not talk about issues in Philadelphia about African Americans on the air. And you know what? I had to make a decision. Am I going to kowtow to that kind of discussion? And by the way, I was the only black person on the air. Or am I going to speak up? So the next day, well, you know what I did? I talked about black folk and I interviewed black folk. And the day after that, I lost my job. Now, that's sacrifice. That is sacrifice. And it took me a year. And that's what I'm saying to you. We have got to stop going with these moments. And we have to deal, if you're going to create a movement, and we cannot be oblivious to the fact that racism is causing economic problems for the black community. It's causing economic problems for the entire country. Mm-hmm. And it's only going to be solved by confronting policymakers and making sure that they have programs. And by the way, it might cost billions of dollars to resolve. Look, and again, what was King fighting for at the time he died? Better jobs. Well, my goodness, aren't we doing the same? Higher wages, decent housing, education that was equal for almost anybody who wants it, and then voting rights. Let's take, for example, purging. You know, look up the definition of purging. Purging can be done both violently and non-violently. Now, by the way, and the reason people purge is they don't want what they call undesirables to vote. Yeah. We used to be purged violently. Yeah. We were hung if we had to vote. Now what they do is they purge us through all kinds of legal or quasi-legal methods.
Right. Joe, we got a hard break here at the bottom of the hour. Can you stick around for 6 minutes, or you got to run?
No, I'm with you. No,
okay,
I'm
stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I always find these conversations fascinating. Joe Madison is with us, the host on Sirius XM, Channel 126, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every weekday. Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon. which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Joe Madison is with us, one of America's most brilliant, finest talk show hosts, one of America's top 10 talk show hosts, too. You can hear him every day at SiriusXM, channel 126, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., Monday through Friday. Joe, welcome back. The Edmund Pettus Bridge. There's a campaign. I guess you got links to it on your Facebook page and over on your homepage at joemadison.com. Edmund Pettus was he was the grand dragon of the Klan in Alabama back in the day. And tell us the story and what you're doing with this.
Well, let me tell how this started. You know, we're all praying for John Lewis. And I've known John Lewis, since the time I was a teenager. And there was a time most people didn't even know who John Lewis was, and he had almost been forgotten. But we had, Tom, I felt the country, both liberals and even conservatives and people of all stripes that are praying that he gets well. But it dawned on me. I said, this man, and I'm hearing some feedback. I don't know if that's me or you, but
okay.
But
go ahead.
I said, we have got to remember celebrate John Lewis while he's alive. And one of the things I said was, let's take the name of Edmund Pettus off that bridge and put up the name of John Lewis. Now, let me go beyond what you just said. First of all, that bridge was not named after Edmund Pettus until 1940, and it was an in-your-face kind of thing because Dallas County was majority black. It was just a way of saying who was still in charge by this white supremacist, who, by the way, was a brigadier general in the Confederate Army and believed that, and these are his words, that civilization could not exist without slavery. Wow. And that was part of the dedication that quotes that were attributed to him. That bridge was named after him 30 years, 3 decades after he had died. He was a U.S. Senator at the age of 75, and he was the youngest of 9 brothers. One of the brothers was the governor of Mississippi, during the Confederacy. He was a die-in-the-wool white supremacist, no ifs, ands, buts about it. And that bridge was dedicated to him to send a message to the black folk that we're still in charge. So my position is that, look, let's take that name Edmund Pettus off, just like we want to take Confederate flags down, just like the mayor of New Orleans took down Confederate monuments, and put up the name of John Lewis while he is still alive, because you know what will happen. I want him to live a long life. But you know what would happen if something happened to John Lewis today? Oh, we'd be naming libraries. We'd be naming street corners. We'd be naming everything. I want people to smell the roses while they're alive. But here's the problem. it has to be done by the Alabama state legislature. They have to change it. It can't be done by the federal government. It has to be done by Alabama, and I just hope that people will contribute to making this happen.
So who does that, Joe? Who makes that decision? Is it the city? Is it the state? Is it the county?
No, the state, the Alabama state legislature.
Okay.
And then the governor has to sign it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it has to be done. Now, there's some people, I'll be honest, who are saying, no, don't change the name. I don't understand this. That is too symbolic. What you can do for John Lewis is, get the Voting Rights Act passed and that the Supreme Court gutted.
Why don't we do both?
Well, hello. Hey, Tom, that's exactly what I said. I said, wait a minute, it's not either or. Are you kidding me? You're absolutely 100% correct. And then somebody said, well, it's too symbolic. Well, my God, naming it Edmund Pettus was symbolic. Mm-hmm. And so here's my point. When my grandchildren, if they would take a pilgrimage to Selma, Alabama, I would rather them look up on the name on that bridge, and instead of asking who was Edmund Pettus, I'd rather have them asking, well, who was John Lewis 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and have the name of somebody who, what did we talk about? Sacrifice, who almost sacrificed his life in order for people to be able to register and vote, because that's what that fight was about. That's what Bloody Sunday was all about. So I'm just asking people to put the pressure on the state of Alabama, and let's do it while John. Can you imagine having John Lewis alive and seeing that name of Edmund Pettus come off that bridge? And most people, let's be quite candid, probably didn't even know who Edmund Pettus was.
Right. Yeah. But it's in my mind, it's the equivalent of one of these lost cause memorial statues, these Confederate statues. And
it's exactly what it was. 1940. That's exactly what it was. That's exactly why that name was put there. You're absolutely 100% correct.
Yeah, and it was also part of this larger attempt to basically exonerate the Confederacy for the treason that they committed and the crimes that they against, particularly against African Americans, that they perpetrated for centuries. It's just remarkable. So people can sign on for that. You've got a petition over at joemadison.com and on your Facebook page. Yeah. Yep.
And I think there's several other petitions going on, and I don't think we could have enough, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a fight. Now, they tried to change the name, I think a few years ago, to Freedom Trail or something like that. But my position on that is that's what they ought to name the highway from the foot of the bridge to Montgomery, Alabama.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to take it as far as I can. But I just, I love John Lewis. He's a fraternity brother of mine. I have tremendous respect for him. And I think if anybody's name ought to be on that bridge, like I said, it ought to be him, because he spilled his blood along with others on Bloody Sunday.
There you go. And joemadison.com and Joe Madison's Facebook page, you can find a petition or links to a petition. Joe, it's always great talking to you. Thanks so much for dropping by today.
My best to you, man.
Thank you.
Let's be prepared to sacrifice.
There you go. Yeah, and to stand up and to speak out and to have the courage of our convictions. Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Coming up on 44 minutes past the hour, we'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back, Joan in Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Joan, what's up?
Oh, Tom, so much. But I wanted to, I wish I had been able to ask Joe a question. But anyway, we're talking about the elections coming up and voting and Dr. King's part in, getting the voting rights passed for African Americans. And I get a lot of pushback from other African Americans when I tell them that I voted once, and that was for Nancy Pelosi's, one of her brothers, Tommy D'Alessandro. Mm-hmm. And after watching the results of that and how it affected the black community in Baltimore, Maryland, I knew that, all the voting, all that mess, the voting and all that, the campaign, it was just a dog and pony show. And I believe, and I'm very thankful for those who fought and died for us to get the vote, for African Americans to get the vote. But in my opinion, I think that they were really fighting for and died for freedom to choose to vote or not to vote. I would be equally upset if I was being forced to vote, just as I, was upset when black people were forced not to vote. We were not allowed to vote. And I just wanted to know what you thought of that. And also to the gentleman who called and said that glass feels like it's going through his veins when they talk about the founding fathers. I have experienced that too. And as far as the gentleman who called and said that black people need to do something, well, we do. We are doing something. Every morning that every black person gets out of bed and put their feet on the floor and go back out into the world, go to work or whatever, we are doing something. Don't dismiss that. Because if the people, the black people who came before us, if they had stayed in bed, if they had not had the courage to get up and put their feet on the floor every day and go out and face, knew what they were facing, knew what they were going to face, but they did it anyway every day. That is something. And knowing what you were facing, death, even to this day, if I go to the supermarket, I can be shot down for doing nothing. So nothing's really changed.
Yeah.
And as far as voting, if I had the right kind of money, I would not have to cast a vote. And my issues and concerns would be addressed.
Yeah.
And the fact that black people have been voting Democratic, or voting for the Democrats all these years, and with black women being known as the base and the way black women fight for a Democratic Party and Democratic candidates, and they are nowhere in the Democratic Party in the high echelon. So,
Oh, you've got a number of black women in leadership in the Democratic Party. In the House, you've got several black...
What about the DNC and the DCCC? Where the real decisions are made.
Yeah, Donna Brazile ran the DNC, Joan. Joan, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Rudy in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind today?
Oh, man, I'm so honored to be able to talk to you guys on MLK. Listening to you, listening to Joe Madison, my friend Kenyatta. It's just an honor. But that being said, Tom, I often call and say white America's at a crossroad, and they are, because you have to understand that hatred is taught. And when something is taught, the teacher concentrates on that person learning something that is what I'm trying to say is hatred and racism are two different things in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And hatred is one of them things that you can hate me and still and be poor. And what I mean by the crossroads with white America is it's this thing called evolution that is not going to stop. It's just as true as tomorrow is coming. And what's going to happen is these people that are hating are going to find themselves on the outside looking in, trying to eat.
Yeah,
Now,
Rudy, if I could just, Wells Fargo in 2012 was busted for pushing African Americans into exploding mortgages and pushing white people into nice, safe 30-year fixed-term mortgages. The bankers at Wells Fargo who were exploiting and destroying the lives of African Americans.
Right.
I don't think we're doing it out of hate. They were doing it out of greed and whatever. So that racism can be complete, as you pointed out. It can be absent hate, but it's it's hateful, the consequences. But hate requires one predicate, and that is fear. And so if you want to turn somebody into a racist, or hate a person who hates anybody, a homophobe or a misogynist or whatever, what you have to first do is trigger in them fear about or of the people that you want them to hate. And that's the two-step process that you see with right-wing hate radio. You see this with Fox so-called news. What they were doing. I mean, the whole thing, all the way that they were talking about Obama during the 8 years that he was president. It was always identifying somebody as the other, as making you afraid of them, and then it's very easy to flip on hate because hate has to come out of fear, and
it's taught.
Yeah, and we have to.
It's fed, and that's the thing, Tom. White America has been fed hate. That's the curse. And
they've been fed fear.
Right. Well, same thing. But you and I, we've come to this same agreement a while ago that it is destructive to white America.
Yep.
And for the life of me, I don't understand how someone can vote against their own interests. And it's making them, it's killing them. It's going to have them under a bridge.
Yep.
I travel this country every day from Georgia to Florida, and I've never seen so many white folks walking the street on the corner with signs up. This is the first time I've ever seen this, and it's happening all over this country.
Yep.
So that being said, is only thing I'm trying to say to white America is, please wake up, because you're killing yourself. Because in my mind, Tom, and I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna get off your phone. In my mind, everything that could be done to a black man by a white person has been done. There's some. I just think that we've become adapted. We have adapted to the situation, and we understand racism far better than white America. And if they don't understand what's going on around them, then they're going to get sucked into something that they can't recover from. So I'm just saying, white America needs to really wake up and understand what's going on. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Very well said, Rudy. Rudy, thank you very much. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Thanks for taking my call. I love Joe Madison, and I would listen to him all the time also. And we have to recognize that the problem, the big problem we have is we never did what Martin Luther King said. We need to judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And we can't do it because we have a horrible habit of judging people by the stereotype that we hear about them. All white people's this, all black people's that, and we don't get past it. And what also don't help it is that the fact that there are still some people, well, I'm going to say some white people in America that have never even seen a black person in person. They may know about them on television, and I said this before to a friend of mine. He said, no, not in this country. Everybody have. I said, no, there are some pockets of this country that people are in their own little area where they don't deal with anybody other than their own people.
Well, I'll take it beyond that, Tyrone. I would bet that somewhere in the neighborhood of 70+% of white people have never in their lives had at least a meaningful interaction with a black person.
Absolutely, and it is so bad because they go on the stereotypical idea of how black people live, and we do the same thing. And I gotta say, I've lived here 56 years in Harlem, and I've traveled down south and back, and I've never had a white person come up to me and call me the N-word. And that has a lot to do with what King, you, Joe Madison, anybody that pushed the idea that you should not dehumanize any human being. You understand? Yeah. Is saying, listen, we all have to live here together. This earth is going to be here when all of us are dead and gone. You know, we're only here for a minimum amount of time, and we need to learn how to make the best out of the time that we're here, as opposed to trying to stab each other in the back and kill each other for nickels or pennies. You know, because after all, when they put you in the ground, none of that's going to matter. Yeah. So we need to learn how to live here, you know, together and make the best out of our life while we're here now.
Profound, Tyrone. Thank you very much. That's profound. Julie in Flagstaff, Arizona. Hey, Julie, what's up?
Hi. I want to say, yeah, Tyrone, this earth is going to be here when we're all dead and gone. And I grieved for a month when Trump was elected. It felt like such a personal, an endless defeat. And I woke up and made several conclusions or life changes, because Joe Madison, I think most of us cannot reasonably sacrifice a career, life, or marriage or politics. But my 3 changes were, one is Sonia Sotomayor's recommendation to do an act of human kindness and a thoughtful act of human kindness every day.
Yeah, it's the old Boy Scout motto.
My second one.
Do a good deed.
Oh, good. My second one is make recurring donations, not just a one-off, to organizations like Southern Poverty Law Center, ACLU, or Free Speech TV. The third one is to make emails, phone calls, or sign petitions regularly online. There's dispute about how much emails and signed petitions are help, but Bernie says they help. What do you think? Do we only have to make phone calls?
No, I love your list, Julie. I think each person has to look at themselves, at their life, at their circumstances, at the resources and tools that they have available to themselves, and make those decisions about what am I going to do? Each one of us has to make that. And I love your three things. Julie, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see, because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with the real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and New African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations. Not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, blackbirds rose. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me Monday, February 7th, over the icy field. Letter series on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland. And Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. To begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight in Chernobyl.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
On the line with us is Tia Schwab, the independent journalist, contributor to Truth Out, former Stone Pier Press News fellow. Truthout.org is where her most recent piece, Factory Farm Conditions Are Unhealthy for Animals and Bad for People Too, is published. And Tia, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I don't think that most people realize that there is no federal law against your local store, or for that matter, the distributor or the processor that they derive from whom they bought their meat products that they're reselling, for your local store to sell you a product that could kill you. I mean, this is there's a piece in today's Washington Post quoting this fellow who's launching a lawsuit, and he says, when I tell people that chicken manufacturers can knowingly and legally sell something that can kill you, they don't believe me. And the article points out, and you point out in your article too, that salmonella, 1 in 10 pieces of meat that you buy in the supermarket is contaminated with this stuff. And salmonella causes 1.35 million infections, 26,500 hospitalizations, and 420 deaths in the United States every year. How did we get here?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and a lot of it stems from our dependence on factory farming. As you pointed out in my most recent article, a lot of people think about factory farms as presenting a lot of health issues for the animals themselves. Factory farms try to increase profits by maximizing the density of animals kept on those farms, so they're often kept in extremely cramped and unsanitary conditions. But as you can imagine, the unhealthy conditions for farm animals puts people at risk too when people are eating animal products or even other food products further down the line. So a lot of this goes back to just the conditions on factory farms.
Well, it's also mind-boggling amounts of antibiotics, is it not?
Yes. So one thing that I wrote about in my article is that way more of the antibiotics that we produce in the U.S. go towards farm animals specifically, more so than people, which is a huge issue. There was the review on antimicrobial resistance, which was commissioned by the Wellcome Trust and the UK government, recently estimated that 700,000 people die globally per year due to antimicrobial resistance infections. And because we use so many antibiotics on farms just to increase growth in animals, but also to prevent disease from spreading because those conditions are so cramped and unsanitary, antibiotic-resistant bacteria are multiplying at quicker rates, which is going to put us at higher risk in the future.
Right. You point out in your article that in 2017, apparently the last year for which we have statistics, 11 million kilograms of antibiotics. And keep in mind that's like, 24 million pounds. And you don't take antibiotics by the pound, you take it by the milligram, by the 1,000th of a gram. So that's a heck of a lot of doses of antibiotics were used in the United States for factory farmed animals. And this is producing an epidemic of these diseases. If you talk to people who are in their 60s, 70s, or older, they'll tell you about a time in the United States when, on restaurant menus, you had steak tartare. In other words, literally raw steak, and people would put, crack fresh eggs into orange juice and put it in the blender in the morning for breakfast, and this was all considered healthy stuff. Nowadays, if you were to do either of those things, you literally are taking your life in your hands.
Yes. And one thing that same report that I mentioned found is that if we don't intervene now, by 2050, they estimate that about 10 million more people per year will die from antimicrobial resistant infections. And that was, if you're looking at it from even an economic perspective, not just the value of a human life, that will cause a 2 to 3.5% reduction in our global GDP as well. So we need to take action now.
I understand in Europe and many other countries, Japan, the use of antibiotics in farming, in animal farming, if farming is the right word, and these hyper-crowded conditions largely don't exist, and they don't end up with a giant waste pools, that are the result of the intestinal systems of these animals being sterilized essentially by all the antibiotics, and so they're not properly digesting their food and things. How is it that we do this? Well, first of all, how unique is this to the United States? And secondly, how is it that other countries can produce relatively safe meat products and we can't?
Well, to answer the first part of that question, I think so. Some of those countries that you mentioned, those are recent developments, and I think that this issue is just now starting to gain as much attention as it is. Even in the United States, there's recently some laws that passed and went into effect in 2017 where medically important antibiotics can't be used for growth promotion in animals. And also if there's a medically important antibiotic that it wants to be used for a farm animal after disease outbreak, it has to be approved by a vet beforehand. You could just administer the antibiotics without getting any sort of approval. So I think there are small steps being taken in the United States to try to reduce this issue. But like you mentioned, so many other countries have already passed laws where you can't use an antibiotic on factory farms just to increase the growth of an animal or to prevent the spread of disease because those conditions are so tight. You can only use antibiotics if there is a proven disease outbreak and you need to administer those. And I think that's the direction that the U.S. needs to move in as well.
I would also like to see us move in the direction of eating a lot fewer dead animals, essentially. Speaking as a vegan. But I'm wondering if anybody has ever done the math on this. There has to be, like if Americans were to eat meat, or there's this whole Meatless Monday movement right now, which is a great health thing as well as a lot of other things. But if Americans were to eat essentially vegan or vegetarian meals half the week, at what point do we hit a threshold where the demand for meat is, and obviously chicken as well and pork and things, that demand, I guess pork is meat, that demand is reduced to the point where factory farms are not necessary or not economically. I don't think they're ever really necessary. I mean, this is all about profit, but where it would once again be profitable to farm animals in a way that is more humane and less likely to produce all these deaths and all this sickness among humans.
I'm not sure I could quote a specific statistic on how, based on the current population size, how many people or how many meals we would have to go vegetarian to make non-factory farming sustainable for our meat consumption. But I think your overall point is absolutely correct that we need to dramatically cut our consumption of animal products as we move towards ideally safer standards on factory farms. The number one thing you can do right now is not purchase animal products, not consume animal products. You can vote 3 times a day in your meals by not choosing animal products. Or if you do want to choose to consume animal products, do choose to buy from local and or organic and or small farms where ideally you can speak directly to the farmer about their practices. But as you mentioned, the number one thing you can do is go animal product free here.
Right, or as close to that as you can get. I mean,
yes, exactly.
And starting out with Meatless Monday, today is Monday. Starting out with Meatless Monday is a great place to start. Tia Schwab, independent journalist, contributor to Truth Out, and former Stone Pure Press news fellow. Tia, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. We'll be back with more. Stick around. We've got a lot of stuff to get into here as we continue through the day. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And coming back from the break on the other side of this, we're going to hear from Greta and George. This is a fascinating short video that's worth checking out. And welcome back. Everett in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Everett, you're on the air. What's up?
Yes, sir. I just want to make a statement. It's something about Joe Madison's statement. Is that we got Ben Carson High School in Detroit, and it's right next to the major hospital here. Okay? And why... they talking about the bridge that for Representative Lewis.
Right.
But, you got to be careful on who you give these accolades to.
Well, I think John Lewis is pretty...
And this is all I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, thank you, Everett. Your point that there's actually a high school named after Ben Carson, you don't have to wait until somebody dies to name things after them, is good. Thank you very much. Alfred in Van Nuys, California. Hey, Alfred, what's up?
It seems you got me here. I kind of put it aside, but it's a great pleasure to speak to you, Tom. I've been following you and listening to you forever, and it's taken a long time. But, yep. And I want to comment a little bit about the Martin Luther King Day and some thoughts I've had for many, many years. I've kind of followed Martin Luther King since I was 7 back in the 60s and kind of laid low with it. But it looks like with what's going on today and all this kind of trying to summarize everything, talk about the movement. I don't know so much about making a new movement. I think we more need to understand something about the spirit of America. Mm-hmm. To me, America was this open country that, people brought their thoughts together and, they donated them for a better half, to make the country great. Mm-hmm. And people seem to have forgot about that, and they all want to get rich and do all this. But I think if you go back, to how we got here in the first place, you look at George Washington, it was one of him, one Martin Luther King, one, most of the great people that made this country great was just one of them, and they did it within themselves. And I think America kind of forgot that. So we put everything in academic, coming from school or whatever, trying to make this country great again, and we're making a big mess out of it because there's no true spirit is being brought forward. We have to get back to the real world that, this country was given to us by those people, and it's left for us to continue that. And we could probably have to take a moment and really think about what we're doing with all this wealth and stuff like that, because I personally don't think this country was built for wealth. It was built for humanity. And humanity is the one to have to bring it back together. So I just, for black people, I used to tell a lot of my friends, people I meet, I say, we only been out of the gate civil rights movement about 65, 70 years. But we're kind of way behind this country is like 240 some years. So there's people that know things before us, and what they do is they see it coming, and a lot of the things that black people say about movements and all this aggression, it just seems to put more fuel to, create a bigger problem for us.
Yeah, I get it.
I think there's just another way of looking at all these things. And,
Yeah, I got it. Alfred, thank you very much. Your points are well taken. It is 19 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. So back in 2016, the election year, Donald Trump was not yet president. He was just running a scam. Whoop, welcome back. Thank you, Sean. So there's an extraordinary video over on YouTube right now that was put together by Greta Thunberg and George Monbiot, the columnist with The Guardian. And it explicitly says, please repost this, please rebroadcast this, please use this. And so it's only 3.5 minutes long. I want to play this for you because it is extraordinary and it is thought-provoking and it's shocking. And then I've got a little riff, a rant, I guess, that I want to get into afterwards with us. So here it is right here.
This is not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest. But we can still fix this. You can still fix this. To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about. But what about a solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabeds, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them. We spend 1,000 times more on global fossil fuel subsidies than on natural-based solutions.
Natural climate solutions get just 2% of all the money used on tackling climate breakdown.
This is your money. It is your taxes and your savings.
Even more crazy, right now when we need nature the most, we're destroying it faster than ever.
Up to 200 species are going extinct every single day.
Much of the Arctic ice is gone. Most of our wild animals have gone. Much of our soil has gone.
So what should we do?
What should you do?
It's simple. We need to protect, restore, and fund. Protect. Tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 football pitches a minute.
Where nature is doing something vital, we must protect it.
Restore. Much of our planet has been damaged.
But nature can regenerate, and we can help ecosystems bounce back.
Fund.
We need to stop funding things that destroy nature and pay for things that help it.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, fund.
This can happen everywhere. Many people have already begun using natural climate solutions. We need to do it on a massive scale.
You can be part of this.
Vote for people who defend nature.
Share this video. Talk about this.
All around the world, there are amazing movements fighting for nature. Join them.
There you go. It's extraordinary. So there's kind of good news and bad news on this front right now. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has shot down, or at least a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit has shot down what's referred to as the Juliana case, Juliana v. U.S. It's being brought by Our Children's Trust. It's a group of 21 young people who have sued the United States, saying basically by continuing to subsidize fossil fuels and the like, you are stealing our future. And 2 out of the 3 judges said, you guys don't have standing. You young people don't have a right. You don't have standing to sue the United States government because the government is helping destroy your future. And one of the 2 judges said, wrong, they absolutely do have standing, and this is a crisis and an emergency. Now, that's kind of the bad news, is that, they ruled against. The good news is, this is being appealed to the entire Ninth Circuit. It's called en banc. I believe it's 11 judges will, if they take the appeal, will hear the case. And B, the court, in their ruling striking down the case, acknowledged that there's a climate emergency. All 3 judges. I mean, the 2 judges who said, sorry, kids, you don't have standing, said, but there is a crisis. There is an emergency going on, and it's something that, probably the country should do something about. But it's just like the way to do it is not through the courts. In fact, what they said was that the solution would not be in the courts. They said, quote, we reluctantly conclude that the plaintiff's case must be made to the political branches or to the electorate at large. In other words, this is something that needs to go forward in Congress and in state legislatures. And it will only go forward, obviously, in those venues if you and I and everybody else who, is halfway paying attention and awake votes for candidates who put climate change front and center in their candidacy, who are willing to fight and work for saving our planet. And that's a growing number of politicians. This has now gone from being only occasionally talked about to being at the center of Democratic Party politics. Tragically, the entire Republican Party is still sold out to fossil fuel interests and is still lying about this stuff, just like the entire Republican Party right up until the late 1990s was claiming that tobacco didn't cause cancer and wasn't addictive, because they were taking money from the tobacco industry. And then that got all blown up with some lawsuits showing that the tobacco industry was lying to us all and had been for decades. They knew that they were killing 500,000 Americans every year, and still are, by the way. But now, it's fossil fuel money is the stuff that the GOP is mainlining. So, it's time to wake ourselves up and get out there and do something about this. And electing people, but B, keep track of this case. I'll be keeping track of it on this program and on this show as we continue to move forward into the future.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back in just a moment. From climate change to Martin Luther King Day, we'll be back with your thoughts as well as more of mine right after this. Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of
my new book,
The Hidden History of This book goes voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, I learned something today. I didn't know that the current owner of the Trump Casino in Atlantic City is Carl Icahn. He bought it out of bankruptcy from Donald Trump, and it's still there. The mayor of Atlantic City wants it torn down. Very, very interesting stuff. Anyhow, we've touched on all kinds of topics today, and so I thought I'd just check in with you now. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. A couple things. The meatless Mondays, marbling that everybody craves in steak is actually a disease. And if the cow was allowed to live, would actually die from the disease. Strong muscle doesn't have marbling in it. It's solid. And there are moss trees that cities can plant that grow that take up to 40 cars worth of CO2 a month out of the atmosphere, and cities around the country are doing it now.
Cool. Dave, thanks for that. That's fascinating information. Peter in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Yeah, excuse me. I'm a retired federal meat inspector.
Oh, my.
20 years plus.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to emphasize the program the government has for meat inspection is great. It's excellent. Now then, they cannot evidently control what the farmers give to the animals, but let people know that the inspection program of the United States government Department of Agriculture, incidentally FSIC, Food Safety Inspection Service, that's a division, they're on the job in the meat plants, at the slaughter plants, checking every bit of intestine, viscera, that goes through. So let the people know.
Got it, Peter. So, question. 40 years ago, you didn't get sick from eating raw meat. Now you do. And 1 out of 10 pieces of meat sold in a supermarket is contaminated with bacteria that can make you sick or kill you. How did we get here?
Well, evidently, people or farmers wanted bigger animals, whatever. Just what the previous gentleman said. You go to the market and you look at a piece of meat. You look for the marbling. That is the streaks of fat, which then is rendered off when you cook it, but it does tenderize and so on. But the antibiotics, I just want to emphasize, please, there are so many federal employee inspection people doing their job. We have to attend I attended Texas A&M husbandry school down 20 years ago, and it's still, we have to...
Peter, I get all that. What baffles me is why, the FDA, or the USDA, I guess it is, banned E. coli H157, I think it's called, the particularly deadly form of E. coli. And the year after they banned it, the number of people who were getting sick or dying or having kidney failure, permanent kidney failure, just collapsed. I mean, it dropped really substantially as a result of that ban. They've since banned 6 other pathogens that are in food. But they refused to ban salmonella, which kills several hundred people a year and accounts for hundreds of thousands of illnesses. What can we do to get the federal government to ban salmonella, to force the meat industry to stop pushing salmonella through the pipeline, inspected or uninspected, because you can't do anything about it. It's not illegal.
Right. But let people know also that if meat product, red meat, poultry, is cooked to a degree which is in all cookbooks, believe Poultry 147.
Oh, it kills all that. I get all that. But when you unpack it on your kitchen counter and you set it on something, boom, that's now contaminated. I mean, it's like we shouldn't be having to deal in our houses as if we're dealing with toxic waste. Peter, your point is well taken. Thank you for the call. Shay in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Shay, you wanted to get back to MLK Day?
Yes, sir. And happy Dr. King Day to everyone. I just had a few questions. One, what do we do about the voter suppression and oppression that is going on? How do we fight against it in mass? Two, have you seen the interview with Dr. King where he was discussing where do we go after the civil rights passages and that happened? And also, we know, well, some of us know that I'll just say that Ivanka Trump has acquired patents from China on our voting machine software. And what do you think about us pushing for paper ballots? And then finally, I wanted to kind of push back a little bit. I usually agree with you on most things, but Wells Fargo, I believe that it was hatred and greed, because if it was only greed, then we, as African Americans, would not have been solely targeted. It would have just been done across the board.
Well, they targeted Hispanics as well. They were targeting Hispanics as well. I don't know the personal motivations, but my point was that it doesn't have to be hatred. There's an awful lot of, racist behavior that goes on in this country that's done for profit and always has been. With regard to the voting, there is only one political party right now that is actively, aggressively working as hard as they possibly can to remove people from the voting rolls, and that's the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party has been working for voting rights for years. I mean, basically since the 60s, when the Democratic Party stopped being the party of the Southern white racists and started being the party that was saying, okay, enough of that already, we're all going to be inclusive here. And the Republican Party picked that mantle up. So I think the most effective thing you can do to stop the war on voting is to vote the Republicans out of office, period. I mean, that's the bottom line. Shay, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Joel in Reno, Nevada. Hey, Joel, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling about the antibiotic resistance topic. And the availability in the Eastern Bloc countries, and now research going on in this country on bacteriophage viruses.
Yes.
I had heart failure for years that progressed to the point where I had to have a left ventricular assist device that pumped blood from my left ventricle to my aorta inside of me. So it was a foreign body, and it became infected. And they did 40 debridement surgeries on me to try to get rid of it, but couldn't. So they sent me to UCSD, and they got emergency FDA approval and brought in a bacteriophage virus from Slovenia, and I injected that for a month, and it enabled me to then get a heart transplant. I got rid of the infection and was able to do that. So they're researching this stuff now.
Oh, it's not just now, Joel. They started this stuff back in the 1930s. Actually, phage research goes back into the 18th century. But in the 1930s and 40s, the Soviet Union started doing this because they didn't have access to antibiotics, and they weren't, they hadn't started manufacturing them, and so they were developing these phage therapies. People don't know what we're talking about. Bacteriophages are viruses that are so small that they infect. They're viruses that specifically infect bacteria and kill the bacteria, and they've developed all kinds of these viruses to kill specific kinds of bacteria, including the one that you had in your heart, and it does work. And I've been following the research on this for decades. So that's fascinating stuff.
Yep.
Joel, thanks a lot for the call. Mark in San Jose. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You've been my teacher since Air America days, and I just want to talk about lawyers and propaganda media. The House is USA lawyers, and the Republicans are greedy global lawyers. And, Rupert Murdoch's propaganda on 3 continents, Boris and ending Brexit, and then we got Trump the dictator, and then in Australia, the climate deniers, billion animals.
What's your point, Mark?
Well, that the you and I share the same defenders of these legally lying lawyers and propaganda.
So you don't like lawyers. Okay, I got it. Thanks a lot for the call. Mayor in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mayor, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I know you wrote a book on voter suppression, but I wonder if you covered this particular thing, because it blew my mind when I encountered it. Back in 1992, I had moved back home with my son, and he turns 35 today. So, he was 6 back then. And I thought it was important for him to get involved in a civic way. And so we went to the Clinton headquarters and we volunteered for an hour, and they had him collating things and I was stapling things. And he did a really great job, too. And when we got home, I said to my dad, who was 87, and he was a proud union man, worked at A&B Meats for 30 years. I said, Dad, how come you don't vote anymore? And he said, well, I'll tell you, after they killed Kennedy, I just don't have the heart. Did you manage to put that one in your book?
No, but that's a sad story, and I get it. I think it wasn't just Jack Kennedy; it was Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
I know.
Yeah, all three of them.
It was just a horrible period, and I don't think we even realized the effect that it has. And hey, when you're doing health care, I have a suggestion for a topic. Stop framing it as private. It's for profit.
You got it. Mayor, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. I think the country has PTSD.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Or I can tell you for sure, actually, from having lived through it in the 70s, the late 60s and the 70s, that the country had PTSD from those assassinations. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gary in Naples, Florida. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Thom Hartmann. Thank you.
Hey, Gary.
Hello. Thank you once more. 2 quick points, if I may make it. I didn't expect to make one on the environment, but I must. But first, it's Martin Luther King Day, and we're all humbled, or should be all humbled by today. And I think, and please, I want your input on this. Maybe. In my gut, I think he recognized one huge thing. It's simplistic, but he recognized something. And my guess, he recognized the fact that voting wasn't enough. That he had to be the leader, more or less. Somebody had to be the leader to send a message. And millions of people marched. And I think in the end, that was what was effective. And it may happen again.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we're in one of those moments right now. Gary, thanks for the call. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? Tying a few things together with Martin Luther King Day and, ironically, Greta. One of the things that Greta did with you is she has sort of taken us with her from somewhat of a protest outside of a government building to giving us 3 action verbs. And that's sort of what my call is about. I am going to sort of just ask a question, sign homework, try to break a myth. And it comes from the Million Man March on Washington, D.C., where Martin Luther King led it. And my argument is that essentially, in the long run, that did not have very much effect because this is where we are. So the way I want to kind of ask you and your audience to contemplate this is that out of the 60s, we had the anti-war movement, the anti-nuke movement, the environmental movement, racial rights movement, economic justice movement, unions, women's rights movement, and what I call xenophobia and others' rights, like Vietnamese and whatever. And we also had the GBLTQ. It wasn't called that then, but it was the gay rights movement at that time. And my question is, please, everybody, reanalyze. In the 50 years or so, in the half century since then, how many of those particular movements gained ground? My argument is that the only one that has actually gained any ground is the GBLTQ movement, and here is why. It is because that's who they are. They did something every single day of their lives. It wasn't the annual gay parades that did it. It was them politicizing and changing some legislation. So out of all of that, out of all of those protests, the only thing that really does work is local political activism. I know you just tell everybody to get involved, tag your it, whatever. I just wanted to break a myth.
Yeah, I'm not sure that those are myths, Robin. I think that across the board there has been a lot of movement, a lot of very positive movement for civil rights, for human rights, for animals' rights.
Tom, since 2011, there has been an uptick. And I hear this defensive rationalization. Everything else, all of those big things have really functionally not gained ground. We can do better. It's what Greta said, action verbs.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome, Robin. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Welcome back. Dave in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Oh, Tom, great to talk to you. Been listening for years. Hey, I think on this MLK Day, it's an apropos day for me to call and quote my favorite composer, Frank Zappa. And in the late 60s, on one of his songs called More Trouble Every Day, about the Watts riots, there was a line in the song that said, "Hey, I may not be black, but there's a whole lot of times I wished I could say I'm not white."
Yeah, there you go.
And for every Frank Zappa concert, he had voter registration and encouraged everybody to register to vote. And on that note, thank you. Happy MLK Day.
Thank you, Dave. And I understand that sentiment. Jeff in Orange City, and particularly when I look at what's going on in Virginia right now. Jeff in Orange City, Florida. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom, first-time caller.
Thank you.
Yeah, I used to be a Trump supporter myself. Being a truck driver, you don't get to learn a lot. I started listening to your program and, reading, and I learned quite a bit. Watching this thing in Virginia going on, I think that with the gun rights thing and all the gun violence that's going on, I think there's something here that both sides are missing. The progressives, maybe more the left, says let's get rid of the guns, and the right says we need the guns. And I think they're not looking at the fact that a lot of this predatory pathological behavior and violence in our society, this is a direct result of this, this trickle-down economics from Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
People don't have jobs, they don't have money, they don't have health care.
And it's easy to turn them against each other. Yeah.
Yeah, millions of young men with nothing to do. That's a recipe for disaster. And I think what I'd like to see is progressives just kind of step back from the gun thing and push more towards economic. I mean, National Firearms Act was our most successful piece of legislation outside of Social Security itself. And now, ever since Reagan screwed that up, now instead of having a couple 100,000 registered automatic weapons, now we have an epidemic of millions of unregistered semi-automatic combat-capable rifles. And I know they like to say they're not combat rifles because they're not select fire, but in combat, most people stay on semi-auto anyway.
Right.
So, but that's kind of, I know it's a little off topic with this being MLK Day.
No, I think it's a good point, Jeff. And Dr. King was an outspoken proponent of of economic justice as well as racial justice. So your point is well made. Jeff, thanks a lot for the call. Dan in Portland. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you?
Good.
On talking about cattle and beef in the beef industry, I worked in the organic and sustainable markets for about 25 years in Chicago. Actually just moved out here because of listening to your show about a year ago. But the grass-fed beef industry is actually one of the most sustainable forms of farming those animals. E. coli actually comes from is formed in the large intestine of the cattle, being fed grain. It's virtually null in cattle that actually eat grass.
Well, all mammals have E. coli in their gut. It's one of the bacteria that helps digest food and transport nutrients. It's just the E. coli, this H157, is a mutant strain that kills people.
And it was and it's gone haywire because you give a ruminant animal grain. It's not supposed to eat grain. It's supposed to eat grass.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what causes it to go haywire.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about global warming and stuff like that, grass-fed beef cattle actually put carbon back into they're building prairies.
You're right. You're right. And Alan Savory, there's a YouTube of him out there talking about that. He overstates the case somewhat, but broadly speaking, that's true. Dan, I got to move along. Thank you for the call. Andrea in Gold Creek, Montana. Hey, Andrea, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. First time, long time.
Thank you.
And I didn't catch earlier the guy that was the inspector. I just wanted to tell your listeners to get onto a thing called Safety Recall Advocates or safetyrecalls.org.
Okay.
And this morning they just posted a thing about a Seattle attorney petitioning the USDA to make it illegal to sell meat that's contaminated with salmonella.
Yeah, that's this piece in today's Washington Post that I was talking about. That 1 in 10 pieces of meat sold in the supermarkets right now is contaminated with salmonella, and there's no law against it. You know, your supermarket is selling you products that can kill you, and that in fact do kill hundreds of Americans and sicken hundreds of thousands of Americans every year. And this stuff shows up in restaurants, and it gets on countertops, and it gets in people's hands, and it just gets moved around. And it's why so very often people just go to a restaurant, and even if they don't eat any meat, if it's a restaurant that serves meat, then that contamination is just floating around. It's endemic. So
and it's not only salmonella and E. coli, it's also listeria, vegetables. Just check out that Safety Recall Advocates. It's a really good site.
Okay, got it. Andrea, thank you very much. Yeah, listeria is also a really nasty bug, and it's the same thing. It's antibiotic resistant. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. It's something that we all have to work on. And boy, are we learning that lesson 3 years in, huh? We work on it every single day. So get out there, get active, tag your end. And please tell your friends where they can find progressive media. However you're listening to or watching this program, share that with everybody you know. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Bye.